At 11:18 p.m., only minutes after my son's wedding, my phone rang. It was the hotel's security director. He did not say congratulations. He did not ask about the ceremony. He asked one question that made my blood turn cold. "Mr. De Smet, are you alone?" 20 minutes later, I was back at the St. Croix Grand Hotel, sitting in a locked security room, watching footage I was never meant to see. On the screen was my wife of 43 years. Beside her stood my new daughter-in-law, still wearing her wedding gown. They were not arguing. They were celebrating. Then my daughter-in-law raised a glass and said, "To November," and my wife smiled. "To patience," that was when I heard the sentence that changed everything. "As long as he keeps drinking what you prepare every morning, we won't have to wait until winter." I stopped breathing. She told me it was for my heart, and I drank it because I trusted her. But that night, in that security room, I realized something terrifying. They thought I was too old to notice, too loyal to question, too trusting to fight back. They forgot one thing. I built a $43 million empire by finding the failure no one else could see. And before sunrise, I was going to find out exactly what my wife had been putting in that glass. Welcome back to DannyRevengeStories. I'm Danny. And today's story begins with a family that seemed perfect from the outside, but hidden beneath decades of love and success was a truth that could destroy everything. Sometimes, the greatest betrayal does not come from enemies. It comes from the people we trust the most. When a father discovers that his own family is willing to sacrifice him for wealth and power, he must make the hardest decision of his life. Today's episode is titled The Empire with Oud and Hire. Let's begin this unforgettable story. The crystal chandeliers of the St. Croix Grand Hotel didn't just provide light, they screamed of a legacy built from sweat, freon, and the iron-fisted resolve of a man who started with nothing. It was Friday, May 16, 2025, and the Mississippi River flowed dark and deep outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of St. Paul's most prestigious ballroom. I stood at the head of the table, 72 years of life etched into my face, watching my son, Bastien, celebrate his union with Céline Mays. To the world, I am Gérard De Smet, the titan who transformed a humble HVAC repair business into De Smet Thermal Industries, a $43 million empire of industrial cooling. But tonight, I wasn't a CEO, I was a father, or so I desperately wanted to believe. 43 years, I began, my voice echoing through the silent hall as I raised a glass of vintage Cristal. I looked at Marlene, my wife. She sat there, the epitome of grace and philanthropic elegance. Her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her smile as radiant as the day I met her. 43 years Marlene has stood by me, from the days I smelled of machine oil and desperation to the heights we occupy now. And today, we welcome Céline into this fortress we've built. I saw Bastien puff out his chest. At 35, he still looked like a boy playing dress-up in his father's suits. He was the director of strategic development, a title I gave him more out of obligation than merit. He lived in the shadow of my name, and I knew the resentment burned behind his eyes like a low-oxygen fire. I know there is much speculation about the future of the empire, I continued, feeling the collective breath of the room hitch. Power is not a gift, it is a responsibility. On the 1st of November, I will officially announce the successor who will take the helm of De Smet Thermal Industries. The room erupted in polite applause, but I caught the ripple. Bastien's smirk was instantaneous, the look of a man who thought the crown was already being lowered onto his head. But it was the look between Marlene and Céline that gave me a momentary chill. It wasn't a look of celebration. It was a cold, surgical exchange of understanding, a predator's wink. I brushed it off as the paranoia of an old man who had spent too many decades watching his back in boardrooms. By 10:45 p.m., the gala was winding down. The scent of expensive lilies and spilled champagne hung heavy in the air. I kissed Marlene's cheek. She tasted of salt and expensive lipstick and told her I was heading back to our lake house in Minnetonka. The city felt too loud tonight. The drive was silent. The tires of my Cadillac hummed against the asphalt as I pulled into the driveway of the estate. The house was a monument to my success, a sprawling glass and stone structure reflecting the moonlight off Lake Minnetonka. I entered the darkened foyer, the silence a welcome relief after the cacophony of the wedding. Then, at exactly 11:18 p.m., my phone vibrated. The screen illuminated the darkness. Nico Vercoutren. Nico was more than my head of security. Decades ago, I had found him, a discarded child of the foster system, a boy with nothing but rage and potential. I paid for his education, gave him his first job, and in return, he became the shadow I could trust when my own son felt like a stranger. Nico, the party's over. Go home, I said, leaning against the kitchen island. Gerard, his voice was tight, vibrating with a frequency I had never heard in him before. It wasn't professional calm, it was suppressed fury.
You need to come back to the St. Croix Grand, now, alone.
What's happened? Is it Bastien? Is he in trouble?
Just come back, Gerard. I've secured the VIP surveillance suite. Don't tell Marlene, don't tell anyone. If you trust me, drive like your life depends on it, because it might.
The drive back to St. Paul was a blur of high-speed adrenaline. My heart hammered against my ribs, a reminder of the occasional arrhythmias that had been plaguing me for months. I reached the hotel in 20 minutes, entering through the service basement. Nico was waiting at the elevator. His face was ash grey. He led me into the security hub, a room filled with glowing monitors. A guest reported a missing diamond bracelet in the VIP lounge after the toast, Nico explained, his fingers flying over the keyboard. I went back through the footage to find the thief. I didn't find the bracelet, Gerard. I found something else. He hit play. The screen showed the private bridal suite. The wedding was still in full swing downstairs, the muffled bass of the music bleeding through the walls. Marlene and Céline were alone in the room. Céline was still in her white gown, but she looked nothing like a blushing bride. She was pacing, a glass of champagne in one hand and a cigarette in the other. "I'm tired of playing the dutiful daughter-in-law, Marlene." Céline's voice came through the speakers, sharp and jagged as broken glass. "This November announcement, that's months away. I have debts, and Joris is getting impatient." I froze Joris, her physical therapist. Marlene stood by the window, her back to the camera, her silhouette regal and terrifying. "Patience is the only thing standing between you and a prison cell, Céline. Gerard is a stubborn old mule. He built his life on endurance." Céline laughed, a cold, metallic sound. She raised her glass in a mocking toast. "Just as long as he keeps drinking that tonic you prepare for him every morning, we won't have to wait until winter." My blood turned to ice. Every morning at 6:35 a.m., Marlene placed a glass of green vegetable juice on my nightstand. "For your heart, Gerard," she would say with a kiss. "I want you around for another 40 years. On the screen, Marlene turned around. Her face was a mask of cold calculation. "Shut up, you fool." Bastien still doesn't know the full extent of this. He thinks he's just encouraging his father to retire. "If your impulsiveness ruins this plan, I will bury you alongside him. Keep the doses consistent. Not enough to kill him instantly, just enough to make his heart look like it's finally giving out from the stress of the Empire." 4 minutes, Nico whispered beside me. "That's the length of the clip. They spent 4 minutes deciding how to kill you between the appetizers and the main course." I stared at the screen, watching my wife of 43 years, The woman I had shared a bed with, the woman who had birthed my son, calmly discuss my assassination. The room felt like it was spinning. The fatigue, the dizziness, the heart flutters. It wasn't old age. It was a slow-motion execution. "They're killing me," I whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a realization that shattered the very foundation of my existence. My own family. Nico stood up, his hand gripping my shoulder with a strength that grounded me. "Not tonight, they aren't, and not ever again." I looked at the man I had rescued from the streets, the boy who had no blood relation to me, yet stood there as the only wall between me and a grave dug by my own kin. "You saved me when no one wanted a child with no name," Nico said, his voice low and dangerous. "Tonight, Gerard, it's my turn to protect you." I looked back at the monitor. Marlene was smoothing Celine's hair, a motherly gesture that now looked like a snake coiling around its prey. They were smiling. They thought they had won. They thought they were dealing with a fading old man who would quietly slip into the night. They forgot who I was. I didn't build Desmet Thermal Industries by being a victim. I built it by controlling the environment, by turning heat into ice, by mastering the elements that others feared. "Nico," I said, my voice returning, but colder than any industrial freezer I had ever designed. "Call Anouk Vermeulen. Tell her the Iron Gate Protocol is no longer a theory. It's a war plan." I walked out of the security room, each step heavy with the weight of 43 years of lies. The St. Croix Grand was still beautiful, still glittering, but to me, it now looked like a mausoleum. I checked my watch, 12:04 a.m. Saturday had begun. My wife expected me to wake up at 6:35 a.m. and drink the poison she offered with a smile. She expected me to trust her. She expected me to die. I leaned against the cold stone of the hotel exterior and looked up at the Minnesota sky. The air was crisp, smelling of the river and the coming dawn. My heart gave a small, irregular thump, a reminder of the toxins already circulating in my veins. "You want the Empire," I whispered to the shadows of the people I once loved. "You'll have to burn in it first." I got into my car. I didn't go back to the lake house. I drove into the heart of the city, toward the glowing neon signs of the industrial district where my first warehouse stood. I needed to be among the machines. I needed to remember how to be hard, how to be cold. The betrayal was a blade in my back, but as I gripped the steering wheel, I felt the first spark of a different kind of fire. They thought they were the predators. They thought I was the prey. They were wrong. In the silence of the night, the hunter had finally woken up, and by the time the sun rose over the Mississippi, the Desmet family would realize that the man who built the empire was far more dangerous than the empire itself. The sunlight over Lake Minnetonka was a cruel, brilliant gold, bleeding through the sheer curtains of the master suite. I lay perfectly still, my eyes closed, listening to the rhythmic, steady breathing of the woman who had slept beside me for 43 years. To the world, Marlene was the saint of St. Paul, the elegant matriarch of the Desmet legacy. To me now, she was a ghost, a beautiful, lethal spectre waiting for my heart to stop. The bed shifted. I heard the familiar rustle of her silk robe. Then, the sound that had become the soundtrack to my slow execution, the soft clink of a crystal glass against the marble of my nightstand. "Gerard, darling, wake up," she whispered, her voice like honey poured over a blade. "I've made your tonic. You need your strength for the board meeting." I opened my eyes and forced a smile that felt like it was tearing my skin. "Thank you, Marlene. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You won't ever have to find out," she replied, leaning down to press a kiss to my forehead. It was cold. It felt like the touch of a tombstone. I waited until I heard the shower running in the ensuite. With the precision of a man who spent his youth-calibrated industrial thermostats, I moved. I grabbed the glass of vibrant green vegetable juice. My tonic. I stepped into my walk-in closet, where I had hidden a small, sterile plastic vial Nico had provided. I decanted a portion of the sludge into the vial, then took the glass to the small bathroom sink in the guest wing. I poured the rest down the drain, rinsing away the evidence of her love. I replaced it with a near-identical mixture of store-bought juice I'd hidden in the mini-fridge the night before. I drank it in 3 gulps, feeling the bile rise in my throat. The performance had begun. 40 minutes later, Nico was waiting for me in the shadowed corner of a parking garage in Edina. He didn't say a word as I slid into the back seat. He just handed me a burner phone. "Dr. Cohn de Wilde is waiting," Nico said, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "Private entrance, no records, no insurance trails, just the truth." The clinic was sterile, smelling of ozone and floor wax. Dr. de Wilde, a man whose family I had supported through 3 decades of medical school and residency, looked at the lab results on his tablet, his face a mask of professional horror. "Gerard," he began, his voice trembling, "I've run the tox screen on the sample you provided and your own blood work. Do you know what digoxin is?" "A heart medication," I said, my voice sounding like gravel in a grinder. "It's used to treat heart failure and rhythm problems," Cohen said, leaning forward. "But in a man with your history, a man who has never been prescribed it, it is a death sentence. It's being administered in sublethal doses, just enough to cause the dizziness, the nausea, the fatigue you've been reporting. Over time, it creates a digitalist toxicity. To any coroner, it would look like your 72-year-old heart simply gave out. A natural progression of age and stress. The room felt like it was losing oxygen. How long?" 3 months, based on the accumulation in your tissues," he said. "Another month of this, and you would have had a massive, fatal arrhythmia. You would have died in your sleep, Gerard. And she would have been the grieving widow everyone pitied." I stood up, the rage finally burning through the cold shock. "I built an empire on thermal control, Cohen. I know how to handle a leak. Thank you." I didn't go to the office. Instead, I met Anouk Vermeulen in a windowless room in the basement of an old law library. Anouk was a wolf in a Chanel suit, a woman who didn't just practice law, she used it as a siege engine. I laid out the files Nico had gathered, the footage, the medical report, the betrayal. "I don't want a divorce, Anouk," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "A divorce gives her half of what I bled for. I want a total blackout. I want the Iron Gate Protocol." Anouk's eyes sharpened. She understood. "This is scorched earth, Gerard. If we trigger this, we are cutting the jugular of the family's access to the De Smet name." "Do it," I commanded, "now." For the next 4 hours, we worked with the cold efficiency of assassins. The Iron Gate Protocol was a contingency I had designed years ago for hostile takeovers, but I never imagined the hostiles would be the people at my dinner table. Immediate revocation of all powers of attorney held by Marlene and Bastien. Freezing of all secondary stock options. No share could be moved without my biometric confirmation, and a secondary code held by Nico. The Great Separation. I legally severed the De Smet family assets from the corporate entity. The $43.8 million empire was no longer a marital asset. It was a fortress. Employee fortress. I moved the payroll and insurance funds for my 600 employees into an independent, irrevocable trust. If I died tomorrow, my workers wouldn't lose a cent to my wife's greed. Voting rights. I transferred my majority voting power to an independent board of trustees, effectively making Bastien's title of Director of Strategic Development a hollow shell. "We have the legal shield," Anouk said, closing her laptop, "but we need more evidence for the criminal case. We need to know the why and the who else." "Céline," I whispered, "start with the bride." By evening, the first cracks in the perfection began to show. Anouk's investigators had bypassed the encryption on Céline's business accounts. "She's a fraud, Gerard," Anouk told me over an encrypted line. "Her luxury events company is a black hole. She's currently drowning in $527,000 of debt. She's been robbing Peter to pay Paul for years. That wedding yesterday, she was counting on the dowry to keep the debt collectors from breaking her legs. And my son, does Bastien know? We're not sure, but there's a pattern of large, untraceable cash transfers, Anouk continued. Every 2 weeks, she sends money to a Joris Peters. He's listed as a physical therapist, but our surveillance shows they spend very little time on therapy and a lot of time in high-end hotel rooms. My son was being cuckolded by a physical therapist while his mother poisoned his father. The de Smet house wasn't a home, it was a den of vipers. That night, I returned to the lake house. The air was thick with the scent of roasted lamb and expensive wine. Marlene was at the piano, playing a soft Chopin nocturne. She looked like an angel. "You're late, Gerard," she said, not breaking her rhythm. "Bastien and Céline are coming over for a nightcap. We should celebrate the first day of our new family." "I had some technical issues at the plant," I said, pouring myself a glass of scotch. I made sure she saw my hand shake slightly. I needed her to think the degoxin was working. "The cooling systems are failing, Marlene. Everything is overheating." She stopped playing and walked over to me, placing her hand on my chest, right over my struggling heart. "You just need to rest, darling. Let Bastien take more of the load. He's ready. We're all ready." I looked into her eyes I had adored for 4 decades, and saw nothing but a calculation of my remaining lifespan. I'm sure he is. Bastien and Céline arrived shortly after. My son looked agitated, his eyes darting to his phone. Céline was glowing, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. A grandchild. The next generation of the de Smet bloodline. "Father," Bastien said, his voice tight. "We were talking about the November announcement. Maybe we should move it up. Given your spells lately, it might stabilize the market." "The market is fine, Bastien," I said, my voice a low growl, "and I'm not dead yet." The silence that followed was suffocating. Céline broke it with a high-pitched, artificial laugh. "Oh, Gerard, don't be so morbid. We just want you to enjoy your retirement. You've earned it." I excused myself to the study, claiming I needed to check a shipment, but the real reason was the alert Nico had sent to my burner. He had intercepted a localized burst of data from the house's guest Wi-Fi. I opened the file. It was a screenshot of a text message sent from Céline to Marlene, sent only 10 minutes ago while they were sitting in my living room. "He's still too strong. If Bastien finds out the baby isn't his, he'll ruin everything. We need to finish this before the trust is updated." The glass of scotch in my hand shattered. I didn't even feel the shards cutting into my palm. The baby. The hair I was supposed to leave my empire to. It wasn't even a de Smet. I looked at the blood dripping from my hand onto the Persian rug. It was a deep, vibrant red. The only honest thing left in this house. They thought they were playing a game of chess with an old man. They thought they had cornered the king. They didn't realize that I had already flipped the board. I wiped the blood on a linen napkin and walked back into the living room. Marlene was pouring another round of drinks. Céline was smiling at my son, a predator wearing the skin of a wife. "Is everything all right, Gerard?" Marlene asked, noticing my hand. "You've cut yourself." I looked at her, then at the bride, and finally at the boy I had raised as my own son. "It's just a scratch, Marlene," I said, a terrifyingly calm smile spreading across my face. "But you know what they say about an old machine. Even when it's breaking down, it can still crush anything that gets caught in the gears." I picked up my glass, the clean one, and raised it to the room. "To family," I said, "and to the secrets that keep us together." I drank, and as the liquid hit my throat, I knew. The time for being a victim was over, the iron gate was closed, and now the screams were about to begin. The air in Minneapolis during late June is usually thick with humidity, but inside my private study at the lake house, it felt like a tomb. I sat in the darkness, the only light emanating from the glowing tablet in my hand. On the screen was the face of my son's wife, Céline, captured in high-definition infrared by Sabine Goossens, the private investigator I had hired to peel back the skin of this rotting family. In the photos, Céline wasn't the lifestyle influencer or the perfect bride she pretended to be in her social media posts. She was in the arms of Joris Peters, her physical therapist, in a secluded corner of a park. The way they touched, the raw, animalistic desperation in their movements, told a story that began long before she walked down the aisle at the St. Croix Grand. The affair started nearly a year before the wedding. Gerard. Sabine's voice crackled through the secure line. And the medical records we acquired from her OBGYN. They're conclusive. A clandestine paternity test was conducted last month. The baby Céline is carrying is not Bastien's. It belongs to Joris. I felt a physical blow to my gut, sharper than any effect of the digoxin Marlene was still trying to feed me. My son, my only boy, was being built into a fool, a placeholder for another man's legacy. My heart bled for him. I wanted to storm into his room, shake him, and tell him he was sleeping next to a viper. But then I saw the other files Sabine had sent. Files showing Bastien, my Bastien, sneaking into my home office late at night. The security cameras Nico had installed captured him frantically copying corporate documents, photographing my will, and downloading encrypted financial data. Why, Bastien? I whispered to the empty room. Is the crown not coming fast enough? For 10 years, Bastien had worked under me as the Director of Strategic Development. I had given him the title, the salary, and the prestige, but I had never given him the one thing he craved, my absolute validation. I saw him as a boy who needed tempering, a man who had been softened by the wealth I had bled for. He, in turn, saw me as a tyrant who viewed him as a spoiled son rather than a leader. The tragedy was that I wasn't the only one whispering in his ear. Your father will never step down, Bastien. Céline's voice hissed from a recording Nico had planted in their bedroom. He'll hand the company over to the board of directors before he ever trusts you with the keys. He doesn't think you're capable. He thinks you're weak. Then came Marlene, her voice like silk over a strangler's cord. Your father has used this family to build his own monument, Bastien. He's a cold man who values machines over his own blood. It's time for you to take what is rightfully yours, before he decides to give it all away to charity. I watched the man I raised as my heir begin to crumble under their coordinated assault. He had started meeting with a private financial advisor, someone outside the De Smet circle, without telling me. He was preparing for a coup. He was waiting for the heart failure Marlene was manufacturing to finally take me off the board. But the most devastating betrayal wasn't coming from the bride or the son. It was coming from the moral compass. While Sabine followed Céline, Nico followed my wife. He tracked her to a nondescript, high-end apartment building near Lakeshore Faith University. This wasn't a charity meeting or a cultural event. She was meeting Dr. Etienne Claes. Etienne, my best friend for 35 years. The man who stood by me when the first cooling plants failed and I was facing bankruptcy. The man who was Bastien's godfather. The man who preached about faith, fidelity, and family responsibility every Sunday on his nationally syndicated radio show. Nico had managed to plant a high-gain microphone in the apartment's ventilation duct. The audio was crystal clear. Bastien still looks at Gerard as his father, Etienne's voice said, sounding weary, almost haunted. He won't let you go too far, Marlene, if he suspects what we've done. Marlene's response was a cold, sharp crack of a laugh. You have never truly understood your son, Etienne. I stopped the recording. My breath hitched. Your son? The words hung in the air like a poisonous gas. I looked at the photos of Etienne and Bastien together over the years, the godfather and the boy. The resemblance I had always dismissed as coincidental suddenly screamed at me. The same height, the same brow, the same stubborn set of the jaw. Anouk, I said, calling my lawyer at 2 a.m. I need a secondary DNA profile. Compare mine against the hair sample Sabine took from Bastien's brush, and I need a sample from Etienne Clay's. I don't care how you get it. The weeks that followed were a descent into a living hell. I continued to play the part of the fading patriarch. I would sit at the breakfast table, my hands trembling with simulated weakness, and watch Marlene place the green tonic in front of me. I would look at Bastien across the table, seeing the guilt warring with greed in his eyes as he avoided my gaze. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I was surrounded by $43.8 million of success, yet I had never been more bankrupt. On June 28, 2025, the final hammer fell. I was in Anouk Vermeulen's office. She didn't say a word as she slid a thick manila envelope across the mahogany desk. Her face, usually an impenetrable mask of legal steel, showed a flicker of genuine pity. I opened the report. My eyes skipped past the technical jargon, searching for the only percentage that mattered: probability of paternity. Percent. The second report followed. Subject: Etienne Clay's, probability of paternity, 99.99%. The world didn't explode. It didn't end with a bang. It ended with the silent, rhythmic ticking of the clock on Anouk's wall. 43 years. Every anniversary, every birthday. Every I love you whispered in the dark. It was all a lie, a meticulously maintained facade designed to house another man's child in my empire. Gerard, Anouk asked softly, do you want to initiate the police report? With the digoxin and this, we have enough to bury them all. I looked out the window at the Minneapolis skyline. My company's logo was visible in the distance, glowing against the night sky. DeSmet Thermal Industries. It was a name built on my sweat, but now I realized the DeSmet bloodline I was trying to protect was a fiction. Not yet, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from 1,000 miles away. I need to know one more thing. What's that? I babbled to that boy when he was in his crib, I whispered, the tears finally stinging my eyes. I taught him to drive, I paid his debts, I stood by him when he failed. For 35 years, he has been my son. I looked at the evidence of his corporate espionage on Anouk's screen. I need to know if he would choose the money over the man he calls father. I need to know if there is anything left of the boy I raised, or if he is truly Etienne's son in heart as well as blood. I stood up, the phantom arrhythmias in my chest smoothed out by a cold, crystalline resolve. Anouk, keep the Iron Gate Protocol active, I commanded, but prepare a new document, a test. We're going to see exactly how much 31 seconds of silence is worth. As I walked out of her office, I felt the weight of my 72 years. I had no heir. I had no wife. I had no best friend. I was a man standing alone in a fortress of my own making. But as I stepped into the elevator, I looked at my reflection in the polished brass. The Iron Man of the cooling industry wasn't dead yet. They thought they were the ones poisoning me, but they had no idea that I was the one about to freeze their world solid. Nico, I said into my phone as I reached the lobby. Set up the meeting with Etienne. I want to see the man of God in his sanctuary. It's time for the two fathers of Bastien to have a conversation. The war was no longer about money. It was about the soul of a son who didn't even know who he was. And by the time I was through, there wouldn't be enough of the DeSmet legacy left for them to fight over. The silence of my study at the lake house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene. I sat there, the weight of 43 years of marriage pressing down on my chest like a leaden tombstone. 43 years of anniversaries, shared dreams, and the quiet comfort of a life built together. All of it revealed to be a meticulously constructed stage play. I could handle the loss of $43 million. Money is just paper and ink, a byproduct of heat and pressure. I had built DeSmet Thermal Industries from a single wrench and a dream in a food warehouse. I could build it again if I had to. But how do you rebuild a soul? How do you unknow the fact that the woman who whispered every night had been harboring the secret of another man's child since the very beginning? Yet, as I stared at the DNA results from Anouk's office, my heart, the same heart Marlene was trying to stop with digoxin, ached for Bastien. I remembered the weight of him as a newborn, the smell of his hair as he fell asleep on my shoulder. I remembered the grease on his hands when I taught him to fix his first car, and the way his eyes searched for mine during his graduation, looking for the approval I was often too proud to give. Blood might belong to Etienne Clays, but the son belonged to me. 35 years of being a father couldn't be erased by a lab report, but the question that haunted the darkness of my room was far more lethal. Did Bastien love me, or was he merely a vulture circling a dying lion, waiting for the empire to fall into his lap? The next morning, I drove to Lakeshore Faith University. The campus was a monument to Etienne's ego, pristine, holy, and funded by the very morality he preached on the airwaves. I didn't call ahead. I bypassed his secretary with the aura of a man who owned the air they breathed and stepped into his private office. Etienne looked up, his face a mask of practiced serenity that quickly dissolved into sheer naked terror when he saw my eyes. Gerard, what a surprise. I was just preparing my sermon on. Save the scripture for the sheep, Etienne, I snarled, slamming the door shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I walked toward his desk, every step a calculated threat. I've seen the reports. I know about the apartment. I know about the child you planted in my home like a parasite. The man of God collapsed into his leather chair, his skin turning the color of curdled milk. Gerard, it was a lifetime ago. Marlene and I, we were young, we were. You were cowards, I spat. I leaned over his desk, my face inches from his. For 35 years, I raised your son. I gave him my name, my money, and my life. And while I was doing that, you were preaching about the sanctity of the family. I never wanted this to hurt you, he whispered, his voice trembling. I told Marlene it was too far. I told her Bastien wouldn't allow. Don't lie to me, I roared, the sound vibrating the glass awards on his shelf. I grabbed him by the collar, pulling him upward until he was forced to look at the rage of a man he had betrayed for 4 decades. You knew she was drugging me. You knew about the digoxin. You sat at my table, drank my wine, and watched her pour slow death into my glass, didn't you? Etienne didn't answer. He didn't deny it. He just looked away, his silence a deafening confession. In that moment, I realized my best friend hadn't just betrayed me for a woman. He had chosen to protect his reputation, his radio show, and his secret legacy over my very life. I threw him back into his chair with a grunt of disgust. You aren't a man of faith, Etienne. You're just a coward hiding behind a pulpit. Stay away from my son. If you even look at Bastien, I will burn this university to the ground with the truth. While I was confronting one ghost, another war was breaking out at the lake house. Nico's hidden microphones captured a scene that would have been comedic if it weren't so tragic. The perfect alliance between the mother-in-law and the bride was tearing itself apart. $8.4 million, Marlene. Celine's voice was sharp, devoid of the bubbly influencer persona she wore for the cameras. That is the price of my silence. If that money isn't moved into my offshore account by Monday, the world finds out about you and the holy Etienne Clays. I'll make sure the press knows exactly whose blood is running through Bastien's veins. I heard the sound of a slap, hard and visceral. You ungrateful little bitch, Marlene hissed, her voice sounding like a serpent. I brought you into this family. I paid your debts. I gave you a name that actually means something. You gave me a sinking ship, Marlene, Celine screamed back. You're poisoning the only man who has the keys to the vault. If Gerard dies before he signs the new trust, I'm stuck with a husband who has nothing but a fancy title and a father-in-law who is actually a radio preacher. Pay me, or I'll burn the whole de Smet legacy to the ground. I sat in my car, listening to the feed, a grim smile on my face. The vipers were eating each other. Marlene had thought she found a puppet in Celine, but she had actually invited a shark into the tank. Anouk met me later that evening at a secure location in Bloomington. She looked troubled. "It gets worse, Gerard," she said, sliding a document across the table. "My team intercepted a draft from Marlene's private attorney. It's a medical power of attorney." I scanned the legalese. It was a masterpiece of deception. If I were to be declared incapacitated, which the digoxin was designed to ensure, Bastien would be granted total control over my medical care, my personal assets, and my voting shares in De Smet Thermal Industries. "It's a death warrant," I whispered. "It's more than that," Anouk said, her voice grave. "Nico's surveillance shows that Bastien has had this document in his possession for 4 days. He hasn't signed it yet, but he hasn't told you about it either. He's sitting on the fence, Gerard. He's looking at your empire, and he's looking at your life, and he's weighing them on a scale. The betrayal of my wife was a wound. The betrayal of my friend was a scar. But the silence of my son, the boy I had raised to be a man of honor, was a dagger in my heart." "He's my son, Anouk," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "I don't care about the DNA. I raised him." "Then you need to know who he truly is," she replied firmly, "before they finish what they started." I stood up, the coldness of the Iron Gate Protocol settling into my bones. I was no longer just a husband or a father. I was a man who had built a $43 million empire, and it was time to use that empire to find the truth. "We're going to give him the choice," I said, my voice like iron. "I don't need to know whose blood is in his veins. I need to know if, when my life is literally in his hands, he chooses the father who loved him or the empire he thinks he's owed." "What are you planning?" Anouk asked. I looked at my watch. It was almost time for my evening tonic. "A final performance," I said. "We're going to stage a collapse. A medical emergency right in the middle of the lion's den. I want to see how long it takes for my son to pick up the phone, or if he just waits for the silence to take me." I walked out of the room, the weight of 43 years finally lifting, replaced by a singular, burning purpose. The Iron Man wasn't going to die quietly. I was going to force them all to look into the mirror, and God help them if they didn't like what they saw. August 14, 2025. A day that should have been a humid, stagnant Minnesota summer evening, but instead, it became the coldest day of my life. The stage was set with the precision of a multi-million-dollar industrial cooling rig. Nico had spent the afternoon installing pinhole cameras behind the eyes of the family portraits in the living room of the lake house. Anouk was stationed in a blacked-out van 300 yards down the driveway, monitoring the feeds with a team of investigators. Behind them, a private ambulance sat with its engine idling, Dr. Cohen DeWild waiting with a defibrillator he hoped he wouldn't have to use for real. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the green liquid in the crystal glass Marlene had just handed me. My tonic, my slow-motion bullet. "Drink up, Gerard," Marlene said, her voice a soft caress that made my skin crawl. "You've been looking so pale lately. I worry the stress of the November announcement is finally catching up to you." "I'm fine, Marlene," I lied, my voice steady despite the roar of adrenaline in my ears. "Just a bit of a chill in my bones. I think I'll join you and the kids in the living room." Bastien and Céline were already there, seated on the Italian leather sofa like a portrait of the perfect heirs. Bastien was nursing a scotch, his eyes fixed on the floor, his posture slumped with the weight of the forged medical power of attorney I knew, was tucked into the pocket of his blazer. Céline was scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving with a predatory rhythm. I walked to the center of the room. The air felt heavy, pressurized. I looked at the three of them, the wife who was poisoning me, the son who wasn't mine, and the daughter-in-law who was carrying a stranger's child. Then I triggered the collapse. I didn't just fall. I shattered. I dropped the glass, the green sludge splattering across the white rug like a toxic spill. I let out a choked, guttural sound, clawing at my chest as I buckled to my knees. My heart, already stressed by the knowledge of their betrayal, hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I hit the floor hard. The impact vibrated through my skull, but I kept my eyes fixed in a glassy, vacant stare. I was a technician of the cold. I knew how to simulate a system failure. I went limp, my breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches that sounded like a machine running out of oil. "Father," Bastien's voice erupted, genuine panic cutting through the air. I heard the scuff of his shoes as he scrambled off the sofa. "Father, can you hear me?" I felt his hands on my shoulders, shaking me. For a fleeting second, I felt a surge of hope. "Call them, Bastien. Call the ambulance. Save the man who raised you." "He's having a heart attack," Bastien yelled, his voice cracking. I heard the rustle of his fabric as he reached for his phone. "I'm calling 911. Wait." The word was a whip crack. It was Céline. I lay there, a silent observer in my own tomb, as I heard the sound of a struggle. Not a physical fight, but a frantic, hushed grab for the phone. "Give me the phone, Bastien," Céline hissed. Her voice was unrecognizable. Gone was the sweet, high-pitched influencer tone, replaced by the cold, jagged edge of a debt-ridden gambler. "If he breathes, we starve. Look at him. He's finally breaking. If he wakes up and finds out about the documents, we are dead. You'll be a nameless nobody with $40 million of debt and no legacy." "Céline, move. He's dying." Bastien's voice was a whisper of agony. "He's lived 72 years, Bastien." Marlene's voice joined the fray, calm and terrifyingly rational. I felt her shadow fall over me. I could imagine her standing there, looking down at the man she had spent 43 years with, as if I were a piece of faulty equipment. This is the mercy of the universe. This is the moment you become the man you were meant to be. Don't be the one to resurrect the king who never believed in you. I felt a hand, Bastien's hand, falter on my arm. "The medical power of attorney," Marlene continued, her voice a velvet noose. "It's in your pocket. If the paramedics come now, he goes to the hospital, he recovers, and he signs the company over to a board of strangers. But if you wait just a few minutes, you are the successor. You are the de Smet Empire." Silence. A silence so profound I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I started my own internal count. 1, 2, 3. 35 years of fatherhood were being weighed against $43 million. Every baseball game I attended, every business lesson I taught, every time I held him when he was a boy, it was all on the scale. 10, 11, 12. I heard the heavy, labored breathing of my son. I could almost feel the heat of his thumb hovering over the call button on his screen. 20, 21, 22. "Bastien," Céline whispered, a seductive, lethal lilt in her voice. "Think of the baby. Think of our future. Just 30 more seconds. That's all it takes for the heart to quit. 30 seconds and we are free." The betrayal was no longer a concept. It was a physical weight crushing the air out of my lungs. My son was counting my final heartbeats. He was calculating the value of my life in dividends and stock options. 28, 29, 30. 31. The 31st second was the one that broke me. It was the moment the scale tipped. Even if he called now, the man I thought I raised was gone. In those 31 seconds, he had looked at my corpse and seen a bank vault. I can't, Bastien choked out. "Yes, you can," Marlene urged, "just a little longer." The roar of the front door being kicked off its hinges shattered the macabre spell. Nico and the medical team burst into the room with a violence that sent Céline and Marlene reeling. I was rolled onto my back, a mask pressed over my face, the chaos of a rescue unfolding around me. I caught a glimpse of Bastien's face as they lifted me onto the stretcher. He looked hollowed out, a man who had stared into the abyss and realized the abyss was his own reflection. 2 hours later, I was in a private wing of the hospital in Edina. The monitors hummed a steady, fake reassurance. Anouk sat by my bed, her laptop open, the video of the living room playing in a silent, damning loop on her screen. "We have it all, Gerard," she said, her voice devoid of its usual clinical distance. The hesitation, the dialogue, Marlene's admission. It's enough for a criminal indictment for attempted murder and conspiracy. I looked at the ceiling, the sterile white tiles blurring. "I've built systems that can keep food fresh across 10,000 miles of ocean, Anouk," I said, my voice a ghost of itself. "I mastered the science of preservation, yet I couldn't keep the one thing that mattered from rotting right in front of me. I couldn't preserve loyalty in my own blood." "What do we do?" she asked. "The police are waiting for your statement." "No," I said, a cold, crystalline resolve hardening in my chest. "Not yet. They think they won. They think I'm a broken old man who survived by a miracle of timing. Let them believe it. Gerard, they tried to let you die." "I know," I said, turning to look at her. My eyes were no longer those of a grieving father. They were the eyes of the man who built Desmet Thermal Industries out of iron and ice. "The transfer ceremony is in 3 months. Marlene and Céline think I'm too weak to resist. They think the empire is theirs for the taking. I want them to walk onto that stage in front of the world, feeling the weight of the crown. I want them to feel the highest peak of their triumph right before I drop the temperature to absolute zero." I closed my eyes. I could still feel the 31 seconds of silence. It was a vacuum that had sucked the soul out of my family. "Anouk," I whispered, "tell Nico to keep the surveillance tight. I want to hear every word they say while they celebrate my recovery. And tell the board the November 2nd ceremony is proceeding exactly as planned." The hunt was no longer in the shadows. I was the ghost in their machine, the flaw in their cooling system that was going to make their entire world explode. Bastien had hesitated for 31 seconds. I wouldn't hesitate for one. The Desmet Empire had no heir, but it still had its founder, and as the hospital lights flickered overhead, I knew that the fire of my rage was the only thing keeping my cold, betrayed heart beating. The air in Founders Hall at Lakeshore Faith University smelled of lilies, expensive perfume, and the kind of high-stakes tension that usually precedes a declaration of war. It was November 2nd, 2025, and the auditorium was packed with the very people who defined my world. Hundreds of employees from Desmet Thermal Industries, global partners, local media, and the faithful who followed the man standing at the center of the stage. I stood in the wings, adjusting my silk tie, feeling the cold weight of the flash drive in my pocket. Outside, the Mississippi River was gray and biting, but inside, under the glare of the television lights, the heat was suffocating. This event was being live-streamed to the world, billed as the moment I would officially crown the next generation of the Desmet Empire. Dr. Etienne Clays, the university's rector, and a man I had called my brother for 30 years, stood at the podium. He was the image of moral authority, his voice booming with the practiced cadence of his radio show as he spoke of legacy, blood, and the sacred trust of family. Behind him sat my family, the beautiful, rotting facade of my life. Marlene was in the front row, wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than my first warehouse. She looked like the grieving wife-in-waiting, her eyes glistening with rehearsed tears. Beside her sat Céline, her hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly, playing the role of the devoted mother to the future heir, the child that actually belonged to her physical therapist, Joris. And then there was Bastien. He stood near the signing table, his chest puffed out, looking like a king who had already felt the weight of the crown. He believed that in exactly 5 minutes, he would own $43 million of my sweat and blood. "And now," Etienne announced, his voice echoing through the silent hall, It is my great honor to invite my dearest friend, the man who built an empire from a single wrench, Gerard de Smet, to sign the Articles of Succession. The applause was deafening. I walked onto the stage, my steps measured and slow, leaning slightly into the frailty they had worked so hard to manufacture with their digoxin. I reached the mahogany table where the legal documents lay, the documents they thought would seal my fate. At exactly 4:20 p.m., I picked up the pen, but I didn't sign. I looked at the three people sitting before me, giving them one final chance to save their souls. I turned to Marlene first. "Marlene, we have stood together for 43 years, I said, my voice amplified by the microphone. Before I sign away everything I have built, is there anything you want to say to me? Anything you need to set right?" She smiled, that same thin, elegant smile she wore when she placed the green poison on my nightstand. "Only that I love you, Gerard, and that I will be here to take care of you, long after the work is done." Lie number 1. I turned to Etienne. "Dr. Clays, you have been my moral compass, my best friend, my son's godfather." I leaned in, my eyes boring into his. "Do you have any secret, any truth, that you feel you cannot carry into the next chapter of this family's life?" Etienne bowed his head, the picture of humility, but his eyes remained cold as stones. "I have only prayers for your health, Gerard. The truth is in the Lord's hands." Lie number 2. Finally, I looked at Bastien, my son, the boy I had taught to drive, the boy whose education I had paid for, and the man who had watched me die on my living room floor for 31 agonizing seconds. "Bastien," I whispered, the microphone catching the tremor in my voice, "is there anything you want to tell me, my son?" Bastien glanced at Marlene. He glanced at Céline. I saw the flicker of the boy he used to be, the one who loved me before greed rotted him from the inside out. But then he straightened his suit and looked me in the eye. "No, father, I'm ready to lead." Lie number 3. I felt the final string of my heart snap. I clicked the pen shut and placed it on the table. "Then I'm afraid the ceremony is over," I said, my voice suddenly as cold and sharp as industrial freon. The crowd began to murmur. Bastien stepped forward, confused. "Father, the documents." "The documents are trash, Bastien, just like the loyalty in this room." I snarled. I signaled to the tech booth, the massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of de Smet family memories, suddenly flickered and went dark. Then, a video began to play. The hall went silent as the footage from the St. Croix Grand VIP room filled the screen. The world watched as Céline toasted to my death. "Just as long as he keeps drinking that tonic bar chuẩn bị vào mỗi buổi sáng, chúng ta sẽ không phải đợi đến mùa đông." Gasps erupted from the audience. Céline turned white as her own wedding dress. Marlene's mask began to crack. Next came the medical reports from Dr. de Wilde, the chemical proof of the digoxin poisoning. Then the DNA results, flashing in giant neon letters, probability of paternity for Bastien de Smet, 0.0%. The murmurs turned into a roar. Bastien looked like he had been struck by lightning. He turned to Etienne, then to Marlene, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream of realization. "What is this?" Etienne shouted, trying to regain control of the stage. "Gerard, this is a madness. This is a fabrication." "Is it?" I asked. "Then let's watch the finale." The screen showed the living room of my lake house on August 14th. The world watched me collapse. They watched Bastien reach for his phone, and they watched Céline and Marlene stop him. But the most haunting part was the timer that Nico had edited onto the corner of the screen. 0 Koi, fifth one. The video showed my son standing over my body, calculating my net worth while I gasped for air. When the video ended, the silence in Founders Hall was more terrifying than the noise. Céline scrambled to her feet, trying to shove her way toward the exit. But Nico Vercouteren was already there, his arms crossed, his security team blocking every door like a wall of iron. "Let me out," she shrieked, her perfect lifestyle persona evaporating into a guttural, desperate howl. Marlene finally snapped. She stood up, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "You think you can do this to me?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I built you, Gerard. I spent 43 years playing the part of the perfect wife while you built your machines. I earned that money. If I had to put a little medicine in your juice to get what was mine, then that was the price you had to pay for your arrogance." The confession was caught on every microphone, broadcast to every news outlet in the state. Etienne collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. "It's true," he whimpered, the sound barely audible over the chaos. "Bastien is mine. I knew what she was doing. I knew you were in danger, Gerard, but I couldn't lose the university. I couldn't lose my name." Bastien fell to his knees on the stage, staring at the man he just learned was his real father. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Father, I was going to call. I was—" 31 seconds, Bastien, I said, looking down at him, with a pity that hurt worse than my anger. "In 31 seconds, you chose a ghost over a father." I turned back to the audience, to the employees who had looked to me for leadership for 40 years. As of 3 weeks ago, under the Iron Gate Protocol, I have transferred total control of De Smet Thermal Industries into an independent, irrevocable trust, I announced, my voice booming through the hall. No De Smet, not Marlene, not Bastien, not Céline, has any claim to this company. It cannot be sold, it cannot be pillaged, and it cannot be inherited by murderers. The back doors of the hall swung open. A phalanx of investigators and police officers from the Edina and St. Paul departments marched down the center aisle. Marlene de Smet, Etienne Claes. "Céline Mays," the lead investigator shouted over the din, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, and extortion." As the handcuffs clicked into place, the empire with no hair finally found its peace. I watched them being led away, the wife who poisoned me, the friend who betrayed me, and the son who traded my life for 31 seconds of silence. I stood alone on the stage, the lights still burning bright. My family was gone, my legacy was a trust, and my heart was still beating. "Nico," I said into my lapel mic, "get the car ready. I'm done with the cold." I walked off the stage, leaving the noise and the lies behind me. I had lost a family, but for the first time in 43 years, I was no longer a victim. I was just Gerard de Smet, a man who finally knew the true cost of a signature. The dust of the explosion at Founders Hall didn't settle for weeks. It hung over Minneapolis like a toxic fog, the scandal of the de Smet empire providing a feast for the tabloids and the evening news. But inside the glass walls of De Smet Thermal Industries, the temperature had finally stabilized. The vipers were in cages, and for the first time in 43 years, I could breathe without the metallic tang of betrayal in my lungs. The legal carnage was swift and absolute. Marlene de Smet, the woman I had shared a life with, was being prosecuted for attempted murder, asset fraud, and the forgery of medical documents. I sat in the back of the courtroom during her arraignment, watching her. She didn't look like a philanthropist anymore. She looked like a trapped animal, her elegant facade shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. When the judge read the charges, she didn't weep for our marriage. She screamed at the lawyers that I had no right to her money. Céline Mays fared no better. She faced a litany of charges: blackmail, conspiracy, and massive financial fraud. The most shocking blow came from her own lover, Joris Peters. To save his own skin, Joris had turned state's evidence, handing over months of encrypted messages. They revealed a plan so cold it made my industrial freezers look warm. Céline had intended to use the hair she was carrying, Joris's child, as a permanent tether to the de Smet fortune, planning to squeeze Marlene out once I was in the ground. Then there was Etienne Claes. Because he hadn't physically handled the digoxin, he escaped the attempted murder charges, but the court of public opinion was far less merciful. He was forced to resign from Lakeshore Faith University in disgrace. His radio show was cancelled, his books were pulled from shelves, and the man of God was left wandering the ruins of a reputation he had sold for 30 seconds of silence and a 35-year-old lie. But the hardest part wasn't the trials, it was the boy I still, against all logic, wanted to call my son. Bastien wasn't arrested. The investigators couldn't prove he was part of the poisoning plot, only that he had been a witness to my collapse. I met him one last time in my office, the space now stripped of family photos, leaving only the blueprints of the machines that had outlasted my relationships. He looked haggard, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He wasn't the arrogant prince of the St. Croix Grand anymore. He was a man who had lost everything: his name, his fortune, and his identity. "I've signed the final papers, Bastien," I said, sliding a folder across the desk. "You are officially removed from the company. Your trust fund has been dissolved. Your shares have been reclaimed by the protocol. You leave this building with nothing but the clothes on your back." Bastien looked at the papers, then at me. His voice was a broken whisper. "Are you doing this because of the DNA, Father? Because I'm his and not yours?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city I had helped build. "No, Bastien, I don't give a damn about the DNA. I raised you. I would have died for you." I turned back to him, my voice hardening like tempered steel. "I am stripping you of your inheritance because when my life was in your hands, when you saw me dying on that floor, you didn't see a father. You saw a bank account. You weighed my last breaths against a stock price, and it took you 31 seconds to decide I wasn't worth the call." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "Go, Bastien," I said, pointing to the door. "Go find out who you are when you don't have a millionaire's name to hide behind. Start from the bottom, the way I did. Maybe then you'll understand what a legacy actually costs." With the vipers cleared out, I began the great restructuring. I had $43 million of blood money, and I refused to let it rot in a bank. The New Door Foundation, I moved $31.6 million in shares into a permanent trust for orphans and foster youth, kids like Nico once was. I wanted to give a future to the children the world had discarded, the ones who knew the value of a hand reached out in the dark. The Employee Shield. I allocated $5.2 million for a comprehensive fund covering pensions, scholarships for employees' children, and a premium medical reserve. My 600 workers were the true backbone of the empire. It was time they owned a piece of it. The professional board. I handed the keys of De Smet Thermal Industries to an independent board of experts. No more family drama. No more bloodline politics. Just engineering and ethics. I kept $2.3 million for myself. It was more than enough for a man who had realized that the most expensive things he owned, his house, his marriage, his son Burr, were all counterfeit. I invited Nico Vercauteren to join the board of the New Door Foundation. I didn't choose him to replace Bastien. I chose him because when he had nothing to gain, no blood tie, no inheritance, no name, he had risked everything to protect me simply because it was the right thing to do. That is the only inheritance that matters. Before I left Minneapolis for good, I sent a small package to the cheap apartment Bastien was now renting. Inside was a heavy silver mechanical watch, the one I had worn for decades. He had begged me for it when he was 12 years old, and I had told him he could have it when he was man enough. I included a note. "You didn't inherit my empire, Bastien, but you still have time to inherit the principles that created it." I walked out to the driveway where my retirement gift to myself was waiting. A classic Chevrolet Corvette Stingray, as black as a starless night. I climbed in, the leather smelling of freedom, and fired the engine. The roar was a symphony of raw power and untapped potential. I drove toward Lake Superior, the road opening up before me like a fresh page. For 43 years, I had been a husband to a lie, a father to a fraud, and a CEO to a cage. Now, I was just Gerard de Smet. As the blue expanse of the Great Lake appeared on the horizon, I thought about the definition of family. I used to think it was about the name on the mailbox or the DNA in the blood. I was wrong. Family isn't about who is standing next to you when the lights are bright and the champagne is flowing. It's about who stays in the room when the lights go out and there's nothing left to gain. Loyalty isn't a legal contract, it's the choice you make in the 31st second of a crisis. I stepped on the gas, the Corvette surging forward into the crisp November air. I had lost an empire, but I had finally found my soul. And for a man who started with a wrench and a dream, that was the greatest inheritance of all. And that is the story of Gerard de Smet, a man who built an empire, lost the trust of those closest to him, and realized that family is not defined by blood, money, or a shared name. Gerard could have chosen anger. He could have let betrayal turn him into the very person who hurt him. But instead, he chose truth, responsibility, and a future built on principles, not greed. This story reminds us that loyalty is not proven when life is easy. It is revealed in moments when someone is at their weakest, yet still chooses to stand by us. Thank you for spending your time with me and listening to today's story. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Top Episode's Sweet Dadrevenge and join me for more emotional stories about family, hidden secrets, betrayal, forgiveness, and the lessons life teaches us. I'm Ed. See you in the next stories.
Now